Good evening. Welcome to the Scotch Plains Fanwood Board of Education Open Agenda Meeting. Today is Thursday, February 20th, 2014. Mrs. Saradaki, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Cleary? Here. Dr. Kulikowski? Here. Mr. McFall?
Here.
Mrs. Shermer? Here. Mrs. Winkler? Here. Mrs. Warner? Here. Mrs. Bauer? Here. Mr. Whitehouse?
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Would you please join me in the salute to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In accordance with New Jersey Open Public Meeting Law, notice of this meeting has been provided to the Scotch Plains Times, the Borough Clerk of Fanwood, the Township Clerk of Scotch Plains. Prior to meeting in public, the board did meet in executive session where we discussed the most recent HIB report, some legal matters, as well as some personnel matters. And prior to executive session, the board did meet in public for some HIB training. It is required and a best practice for school boards annually to be trained on the harassment, intimidation, and bullying laws. And we had our anti-bullying specialist, Kaylin Taggart, meet with us to give us a refresher. Additions to the agenda, I see we have 3OBB, an extension of a student suspension, and that seems to be it. Any other additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll open the meeting for public comment. In accordance with policy 9322-R, anyone wishing to address the board, we ask you to step to the microphone. All we need is your name and the town you reside in. This will be the first of two opportunities tonight to address the board in public. Sure, just, oh wait, yeah, is there a microphone there?
Oh,
Okay. Usually it's on the stand. The reason we ask if you use the microphone is because it's being recorded. No. No help there? Catherine, can you take a look?
We'll get you some help. I can check the closet. Oh, it's green.
You come to school, we give you a test.
Is it the green lights on? That should mean the batteries work.
Use one of our mics. No, but he could come over and use that mic.
All right.
Just talk in that.
You know what I would suggest?
Just talk in there. Talk in that mic.
Talk in that mic.
Yeah, what we would, is can it be pulled up a little bit?
Just come up.
Come a little closer.
Just so the public can hear you.
Yeah, and you feel free to lift it up if you prefer, however you're comfortable. And again,
This isn't awkward or anything.
only
We're
because
sorry, we're
it's-
sorry.
It's
It is a first.
So my name's Sean Aiken. I'm in Scotch Plains. And basically, I got a couple things to say about the Brunner drop-off situation. So, just a couple statements here. My view is that the Board of Ed needs to establish responsibility for the drop-off arrangements at Brunner and the corresponding safety issues that it presents. A couple things to say about that. It's been brought up to a few parties, and we've heard, a couple different responses, but we really haven't heard any buy-in that a remedy is required or any new ideas to fix it, right? I think that the leadership opportunity is there. Someone needs to take the leadership of fixing this. And I think that given the current situation, it's really a matter of time before someone could possibly get hurt dropping their kids off at that school. So the current arrangement relies on parents, often with several younger children in tow, from my personal experience, walking down the middle of the street with cars parked on both sides to get to a crossing guard, which you may or may not use, depending upon, because you're in the middle of the street, so you can go either way you want, to walk your kids to school with traffic in both directions. Obviously, this is made worse by snow and ice, leaves, etc. Narrows the road, and you guys don't have to have me tell you the consequences there. There's definitely a lack of coordination between the town and the school regarding the timing of snow, ice, leaf removal. Makes it just very inconvenient to do this. It's reduced parking. It's farther to walk for the kids. Last week they closed down the road, and when we went to drop the kids off, the snow was all still there. So if it's a required street for parking and it's so important, we should prioritize the removal of that snow, ice, leaves, etc. Definitely a lack of consistent answers on why this isn't feasible. Every other school in the district has this, except for Brunner. Regardless of geography, sidewalks, traffic, neighbors, playgrounds, you name it. Every other school has this. Terrell has it, plenty of traffic. Every single parent that I speak with that drops their kids off at Brunner, when we bring this up, says, yes, I don't want this situation. We need a drop-off. And we have spoken to the PTA safety officer at Brunner, and we've also, had a word with Officer Hernandez, and all we've gotten is support from both of those. So I want to understand what is going to be, what the way forward is on this, really. And I understand it requires everybody to be involved, but I feel that the Board of Ed needs to take the leadership position on this. Is that less than 2 minutes?
No, you're
You're
good.
fine.
That's fine. That's true point.
Oh, I haven't enforced the 2-minute rule. Yeah, Mrs. Saradaki will handle some of the answer, but before she does, we do work pretty closely with our towns. I'll say Scotch Plains in this case because all our buildings are in Scotch Plains. The ball was dropped, and I've been pretty fair over the years on we're all in this together. But in this particular case, and I'll say it, is in this particular case, from the closing of the road for snow removal, we were notified too late. I don't normally cast stones over there, but because this is a safety issue and I know folks within the Brunner community were very concerned about it, and I'm not one to typically point a finger, but in this particular case, we do need to do a better job of communicating. We were unfortunately on the receiving end of that. That did make for a lack of a coordinated response, and that shouldn't happen. Towards that end, you may or may not be familiar, there's something called the Shared Service Committee where Fanwood, Scotch Plains, and the school board does meet regularly to look to leverage the three entities for financial savings, more efficiencies in process, things along those lines. I did just see a copy of the agenda. It came the other day. At the next meeting, specifically, one of the line items on the agenda is school drop-off of our students. So it will be addressed face-to-face with a board member, Mrs. Winkler. Mr. McFall is also a member, a representative from the Scotch Plains School Board. Mrs. Saradaki also attends those. So specific to the most recent incident where it caused more upheaval in the drop-off process related to snow, but 2 months ago, someone was up here concerned about leaves. And I can't recall if it was Brunner specifically, but just in general. So yes, pick up and drop off in a few of our buildings, and most especially Brunner, has been an issue. In this case, it was exacerbated all the more by bad communication on both ends. Towards that end, though, this has been out there for a number of years, at least a few years that I recall. I'll let Mrs. Saradaki talk more to where we are, but I think as a board, we do need something, this to be looked at with a recommendation as to what possibly can be done. I mean, I remember being over there on site visits myself, looking at the playground and areas, access roads to make some sort of loop, and it's a little dicey, to say the least, but I won't hypothesize anymore and let Mrs. Saradaki speak to this.
Yeah, I don't know if you received my phone message that I left for you today, but we do plan, our Director of Buildings and Grounds and I will be going over there either tomorrow or Monday at the latest to look at the Brunner property. We haven't been involved in that process before, and I think we're optimistic that hopefully we can come up with some ideas that might work. And it will take some time. This is not going to happen overnight because we will have to work with the township and with the police department. But hopefully we can come up with something that the parents will be happy with.
Mr. Aiken, would you mind just stepping back to the microphone, only because I want to hear your input on something? And is the concern that the process now doesn't work well ever, or when we have leaves and snow, that's when it's, I mean, I know it's worse then, but
It doesn't work well ever.
Ever, okay.
Really. And the leaves and snow part make it worse, certainly, as leaves and snow make it worse for anything. But, it's just it's the inconsistency across the district that this is the only situation where a drop-off doesn't exist. And when asking around, you get a lot of shrugged shoulders of like, oh, well, we tried it a couple of years ago, it didn't work. It's like, well, that's not acceptable, quite honestly. I pay the same taxes as someone who goes to McGinn, Coles, Evergreen, etc. They all have a drop-off. And whether it's done by the PTA, I think Terrell School, it's coordinated by the principal. So, there's various, approaches to addressing the situation. And, I don't want to see shrugged shoulders. I want to see, yeah, you know what? We should have one. Let's look into that. Let's do that. And I appreciate the phone call, but it is something we have brought up with Mr. Bortnick pretty much since last year, when we're like, this sucks. You got a circular drive off of Westfield Ave. I hear about buses and neighbors, and then you got the back of the school drop off, and you hear about something else, and it's like, well, that's unfortunately that is not my remit to be concerned about all of the logistics and machinations that go into this. I'm at a very high level. I'm a parent. Everybody else is a drop-off. I do not. And I want to, be involved in the way forward of remedying that situation. And I think that the tone should start from the top rather than hearing, what people have done, lower down in the pyramid. Is that a fair response?
yeah, no, like I said, I just didn't know if it was, hey, the process in place is workable, it needs tweaking, or you're just saying there's.
I think you hit on it before when you indicated, you've seen the property.
Yeah.
There's definitely all right, there's a road there.
Yeah.
I'm not an engineer. I don't even want to get into any of that.
Sure.
But, somebody who is an engineer should certainly, be involved. And it sounds like, like there's going to be some progress made. Very interested to hear about that. We'll absolutely be following up on that. Looking forward to, what the new ideas are. That's really it. I think it's early days. Definitely understand that this is something that does not happen overnight, but it would be great if we could get it in place before the next school year. Because I've got 10 more years at Brunner, quite honestly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that input as well. Sir, did you want to, where the microphone is? No, that's,
We're Matthew Jukes, Fanwood, and we're sort of tied to this when it. I think what needs to be made clear is when we say the drop off, it's the actual ability to drive up and drop your child off, not the ability to park and then walk your child, and that's what we're missing. And we had a pilot, I would call it a pilot project last year. I believe it was last year, 2 years ago. It feels like last year because it was great when it for the parents who used it. It was great, and then they just stopped it. And there was a lot of back and forth about why it stopped, safety or other neighbors didn't like it, safety reasons. And the challenge I have is over the past few weeks with all this snow, driving and dropping my child off, not dropping them off, but getting them to school. I've never seen a more unsafe thing as driving down those streets where you can barely fit your car between the parked cars and you have parents walking. There's 4 or 5 inches of snow on the road because woodland hadn't been plowed, it looked like. And so if safety's an issue, what's there right now is not safe either. I am actually a transportation traffic engineer. And one of the feelings...
oh, Mr. Aiken, you brought an ace in the hole here.
And I did with his, I think it was with your wife, with his wife.
That's some
Before,
teasing.
but more to the fact of, I think they tried to do something last time without actually bringing anybody in on a professional level. And maybe it's time, like you were saying, you guys haven't been involved yet to that level. Maybe it's time that you get a firm or somebody with professional experience. I'm not saying me, I'm not actually licensed, but I am an engineer, but somebody who does these sort of studies to come up with an idea that might work from both a safety standpoint and maybe there is an access that could be, it's challenging. I know from an engineering, there's no room behind with lot size and stuff, and to the Homestead Road really wouldn't, I don't think it would work. But maybe there's a parking restriction way you could have it on the street or something. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't think a professional has actually looked at it from that side. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my feeling. And they just sort of ended it saying safety. It was putting people at risk. So I'd love to hear that the next step of studying another solution rather than just saying, we tried, didn't work, and we're done. So...
yeah, no, that shouldn't be the answer, that the safety piece didn't go away. So,
but it's great to hear that you guys have it on the agenda. Great.
thank you. Mr. Aiken, Mr. Dukes, did I say that correctly? Jukes, okay. Okay. Anyone else wishing to address the board now? There'll be one other opportunity. Okay, before we close this, Ms. Saradaki, I guess through facilities, that'll come out in a facilities report, or you'll report directly over time as you keep us abreast of the progress.
Absolutely. It'll probably come out both in facilities and shared services.
Well, without a doubt, shared services. And to the two gentlemen that did speak to this, just so you know, just because Mrs. Saradaki is looking for a more permanent solution that works better than where we are now, that doesn't preclude the shared service route from I'll say the shorter term to continue to work with the Scotch Plains in this case to figure out something that makes it safer in the interim. So Mrs. Winkler, Mr. McFall, again, we know that's on the agenda and you'll bring that to shared services next week, I think is when the meeting is.
Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no one else wishing to address the board at this time. We'll close this portion and we'll go to committee reports. Do we have any committee reports?
We do. I'll start.
Ms. Cleary, you can start.
We had our first meeting for the new strategic planning committee. And it was actually just an initial meeting. We did a pre-planning meeting where we kind of reviewed the process that was used for the last strategic plan. We briefly discussed how that came about, and the steps that were taken. And then we looked at, excuse me, what's called the 3D model, which stands for Determination, Dream, and Destiny by Design. And that's being offered by the New Jersey school boards. We're very interested in following that. We now have, because we have had a very successful strategic plan in place, we don't need to really reinvent the wheel, but we would like to have a process in place, and we're moving ahead, actually. Our calendar is kind of tight on this. So we have the compiled reports from the last strategic plan, so we can refer to those. We're getting some things together, and we will be meeting with Gwen Thornton, who's our facilitator. I believe the meeting is set for next week. I wasn't sure if it was confirmed, so it is confirmed. And that's really all there is to report now, but the board and the public can expect to be hearing more in the next weeks.
Thank you, Ms. Cleary. This is going to be a very active committee. Again, the strategic plan is a big deal, and such that we've renamed the School Community Relations Committee to the strategic planning, because that's where their focus will be this year. So thank you, Mrs. Cleary, again, and to the other strategic planning committee members. Any other committee reports?
Curriculum met last week and really had two items on the agenda. One was middle school math, looking at a text for middle school math. It's actually been under research and discussion for some time, and because our current text from 2005 is not aligned with the Common Core. Our math supervisor, John Benninger, had looked at what other districts are doing, had narrowed it down to 3 possible integrated textbooks, which were reviewed by faculty, by students, and came up with a recommendation. We looked at the text during our committee meeting, and we were very impressed with them too. It's more rigorous than some textbooks that were eliminated. And so the committee's recommending that this new textbook be purchased. And the cost is $95,000. And includes staff training.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer.
Includes what? Staff training. And the other item on the agenda was really an update about language arts at the elementary school level, and it was particularly focused on reading. It was, again, the supervisor, Jocelyn Dumaresque, had done a very thorough job talking to both students and teachers about the current language arts strategies and program materials, and getting the feedback from, again, both staff and students, and also their recommendations for next steps, which were a variety of things. Could include some more staff training on various things, and some resources and materials that were not necessarily to purchase, but to collect across teachers, resources they were using. So, and she will be at doing an update soon on literacy. I think, although she was going to focus that one on writing, I believe. So that's our report.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer. Any other committee reports? Mrs. Warner. Finance.
Thank you. Finance met February 10th. And we had quite a lengthy discussion of the big picture. Had our business administrator and superintendent there to explain the options in front of us, given the fact that we have a banked cap available to us that would that if it's not used soon, we could lose it. So as we consider the budget, the upcoming budget, we are going to look at the options in terms of the needs, in terms of our physical infrastructure and staffing needs, which what we reviewed in some detail that evening, and weigh that against the amount of resources that are going to be needed. So we will have more detail on this in the future for the board, but we are considering, the Finance Committee is recommending to the full board that we go ahead and use some of that banked cap, or we will lose it. So as our budget discussion goes on, you'll get more detail and hear more about it.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. For the benefit of the public, the budget is, we're in the budget season, for lack of a better phrase. It's not finalized until after the governor gives his speech where he indicates the amount of aid that will be offered up to each of the school districts. That is, what's the 26th of February? So sometime after that, when we know what state aid we'll be getting, we'll know part of the revenue side. Next week, as you see on the agenda, the instructional update, we will not be, given the snow days that we've had, so we did not have full weeks for our staff, and the disruption that caused. We're not in a position tonight to have an instructional update related to the budget. Typically, there's a bunch of meetings in a row. We'll have different components of the budget where it'll be presented to the board as well as to the public. This week we won't. Next week we definitely will, and the subsequent weeks, a few after that. Concerning the bank, the cap bank, I appreciate getting a heads up on that now, Mrs. Warner. That's basically budgets in the past, if I understand correctly, money that we did not go up to the limit that the law allows because we didn't necessarily need it at the time, and other than just taxing for the sake of padding the budget, we kept it to strictly our needs, and you put that in the bank, and if needs are identified, you can pull from that. That's the concept.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, that's a great explanation.
Thank you, Mrs. Warner. I'm sure we'll hear more of that too as we go, but for those interested in the budget, stay tuned, please, over the TV 34 or to come to the meetings because there will be a lot more discussion to come. Anything else from finance, or? That was it?
That was it, basically.
Thank you, Mrs. Warner. Any other committee reports?
Should I give the report now, or?
Mrs. Winkler?
All right. The policy committee met on February 11th to discuss busing. At the meeting, we discussed the history of how we came to be exactly where we're at now. We discussed the idea of offering subscription busing along existing routes where there might be empty seats. We discussed various issues along those lines. We talked about how we can make things equitable. We talked about sorry, I'm just. We talked about the various routes that we have. Sorry, I'm not finishing a thought here. We recommended that we draw up a policy which we will present at our next meeting regarding how we're going to go forward with busing. We may start a pilot program.
For the subscription component.
For the subscription component.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Winkler. Again, for the benefit of the reporters in the room and the public, as we have promised, we're going to try to keep this as public as possible. As you heard from Mrs. Winkler's report, at this point, the policy committee has recommended that administration craft a policy related to subscription busing. And my guess is, or let me not guess, will administration be in a position to bring that policy to the board at next week's meeting where we can have a discussion on it?
My goal is to have it to the policy committee by Monday at the latest.
Okay.
So they can review it, give me feedback, so it can be prepared for a discussion for the board.
Okay, so for those that are interested in following this discussion or being a part of it during the public portion, we expect next week's meeting to be the first discussion in public amongst the board, outside of the committee, where we'll be talking, piloting a subscription busing policy. The way a policy passes, again, for the benefit of the public, is it takes a couple meetings typically that go over the course of a couple months. So next week's meeting, although a discussion will be taking place, a final vote will not take place at next week's meeting, so there will be additional time for public input on any post-discussion comments that the public would like to weigh in. So, thank you, Ms. Winkler. Any other committee reports?
Yes.
Oh, Mrs. Warner,
I'm sorry.
standing in for Mr. Lane. Mr. Lane
Yes.
sent me an email that he was not able to attend, so he won't be giving facilities, but pinch hitting for Douglas Lane will be Betty Ann Warner.
In my own way, I can't do it the way Doug would, but I'll try to give a nice summary of the Facilities Committee meeting, which happened on the very night of the Finance Committee meeting. There were two items that we discussed. One is a little miracle happening called a distributed antenna system, which Verizon has offered, and step in anytime, Ms. Saradaki, has offered to install it in our high school completely free of charge. And the purpose of it is to improve communications on cell phones, primarily, or wireless networks, I suppose, within the high school, only within the high school. We're not sure what motivates them, but since it's free, and there are no strings attached, and assuming all that, we are certainly going to consider moving forward with that offer. The second is we reviewed a recommendation from the administration and wholeheartely support the desire to fund the conversion of some available space to a high school science lab. There's a crying need. Our labs are crowded, and the scheduling difficulties are enormous that we have to overcome to accommodate. So for between $150,000 and $175,000, we will install a new science lab in our high school. And I believe that would be done for the next school year.
That's the plan.
Yeah, okay. So those were very positive turn of events, and if there are any questions, please contact Mr. Lane, Chair of that committee.
Well done. Thanks for stepping in for him, Mrs. Warner. For board members, anyone that has questions related to this, please reach out to Mrs. Saradaki, because the expectation is we'll be voting on these recommendations at our next meeting. So if you do have questions, please reach out to Mrs. Saradaki. Any other committee reports? We'll slate this meeting. Okay, seeing none. As I said earlier, the instructional update we're skipping over this week. There have been no letters to the board, so let's move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehouse. At our next meeting, at this point, we have no out-of-district placements to approve, but I'll keep you posted if any come in. 2S, at our next meeting, I will ask that the board affirm the superintendent's decisions in the 8 harassment, intimidation, and bullying investigations that were reported to the board during the month of December, based upon reports shared with the board during executive sessions on January 23rd and January 30th. 3S, as recommended by the curriculum committee, we will be asking for approval of the middle school math textbook adoption, and that's all we have for curriculum. 4S, tonight, I would ask that the board approve the following field trip requests. The SPF Moonglowers would like to attend an invitational meeting on March 8th at the Long Island Post University, where they will be performing in an invitational event. The SPF Moonglowers will also be attending a similar event in Morristown. The cheerleaders have been invited to Philadelphia with their advisor. They will do a spotlight performance before a 76ers game. And lastly, our Italian exchange students and teachers plan to go to the Jersey Gardens for a cultural experience, a la shopping, because the Italian students that are coming would like to learn about shopping in the United States. So we would like to support their opportunity to do so.
It's so American.
Second.
I guess that doesn't fit when in Rome, kind of in the reverse.
I'm sure our kids will have an equally good time when they do the reverse.
Any questions or comments? Just a piece of information on number 3. For those that didn't know, the 76ers are partially owned by a Scotch Plains alumni these days. Yes. Although I don't think there's any connection between Mr. Blitzer's ownership and our cheerleaders being invited to perform, but we always like to spotlight alumni that succeed as he has done. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Go on, Dr. Hayes.
And lastly, I would ask that the board approve the personnel agenda as discussed and reviewed in exec this evening.
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments on personnel? Mrs. Saradaki, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Dr. Kulkowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Winkler?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleary?
Yes.
Mr. McFall?
Yes.
Mrs. Shermer?
Yes.
Mrs. Warner?
Yes.
Mrs. Bauer?
Yes,
Mr. Whitehouse?
Yes.
and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Moving on to the business report. Mrs. Saradaki, whenever you're ready.
First, I would like for the board's approval of the staff training recommended by the superintendent.
Questions or comments on staff training? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Go on.
2 BUS is for next week for the acknowledgement of the disbursement listings. 3 BUS will be the receipt of the security and fire drill reports. 4 BUS will be a joint transportation agreement for a student who's attending Regional Day School in Hamilton, New Jersey. 5 BUS is a resolution for direct deposit for all district employees, which has been approved by the state, and it would go into effect on July 1st, 2014. 6 BUS is for replacement of a copier at Evergreen School. This is the office copier. 7 BUS is approval of the architect to oversee the HVAC rooftop units project at the high school for this coming summer. 8 BUS is the approval of vendor-related services for nursing. If there's any questions on those, because 9 BUS actually should have an asterisk next to it. Are there any questions on 2 through 8? No. 9 BUS, we have an opportunity to apply for funding to support the implementation of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act. So we're recommending that the Board of Education grants permission to us to apply for the amount of $67,827 to support the implementation of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act starting on July 1st, 2013 through June 30th, 2014.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's get that money, Mrs. Saradaki.
It's a little bit towards that unfunded mandate.
A little bit.
Well, we don't know how much of
Yeah.
that 67,000 we'll get, but.
It'll be prorated.
10 BUS will be the acknowledgement of receipt of the business reports. 11 BUS will be the bill list. And that's it for business.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Saradaki? Board, if you should have any, you know the drill, just reach out to her during the course of the week, because we'll be voting on these items next week. Board policy, Ms. Winkler, this is basically just what you have provided us to us in your
Next
report?
week, we will have the first reading of policy.
Okay. After a robust discussion, we hope. Okay, thank you. New board business. Anyone wishing to bring anything for a future agenda under new board business? Other board business, any requests to attend workshops? Any workshop reports? 2 OBB. Next week, we will be asking for a resolution to be read for Youth Art Month. Anyone wishing to move this, you know the rule. If you move it, you read it. Although this one, we usually have many volunteers. This is a good time to point out that we're, J. Ackerman Coles, one of our elementary schools, has provided the artwork, at least at the table in front of me, as well as the fish behind me, with the theme, School of Fish. So, how appropriate. So we have some nice plaster models in front of us of fish, as well as you can see over my shoulder the nice artwork. So thank you to J. Ackerman Coles. 3OB.
For the environmental message.
Oh,
Yeah. We're cutting down rainforest, if I could say, and if they keep doing it, then cancer will go on. So says one of our first graders at Coles.
couldn't agree more. Thank you. One of the additions to the agenda, 3OBB, I'd ask for a motion to, as discussed in executive session, move that the extension of the suspension for student, and it gives a student number, for 10 days from February 21st to March 6th.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments? Is this a roll or?
It doesn't need to be, but I would recommend you do it anyway.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Ms. Saradaki, then would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Cleary?
Yes.
Dr. Kulikowski?
Yes.
Mr. McFall?
Yes?
Mrs. Shermer?
Yes.
Mrs. Winkler?
Yes.
Mrs. Warner?
Yes.
Mrs. Bauer?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Board. Okay, at next week's meeting, we'll be asking for approval of the minutes from, looks like three board meetings in January, as well as the Board of Ed PTA roundtable / coffee, as it was considered a public meeting, both the public portions and the executive sessions. Which brings me to Policy 9322-R, the second of two opportunities this evening for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the board, we ask you to step up to Mrs. Shermer's microphone and share with us your thoughts, questions, or comments.
So, this has nothing to do with runner drop-off. So I just, looking through this stuff, I just want to clarify, just to educate myself. I'm looking at this yellow piece of paper,
Yes, sir.
and it looks, and make sure I understand this. So does a 20-year longevity give you a $30,000 pay increase?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. So it's not like a gradual. It's like once you hit 20 years, this person is going to get a almost 50% increase in their compensation?
It is a function of how the salary guides have been
Okay.
constructed over the years.
That's fine. I just want to clarify that. I don't, this is all new to me. The other thing that I noticed, and, you know, again, from facilities, you guys can tell me this. I'm looking at your copier. It's a 42% per copy maintenance fee. So every copy that is made on this thing, the district has to pay 42 cents to this company?
No.
No? Okay, that's what it looks like in there.
There's a single, we have a odd situation of a single copier getting a,
It says $111.54 per month for equipment and 42 cents per copy
That's
for
supposed to be
maintenance.
.0042.
Okay, that's because I'm like, we're getting gypped on that one, you know? All right, good.
previous.
No, I appreciate it. I'm just trying to get familiar with
Thank you very much
Well,
for
I
catching
hope
us.
costs, you know?
I see a future board member out there.
Yeah.
Careful what you wish for.
And I just want to mention with the salary guide, because I think in Scotch Plains, you have, the way it's built, you all can correct me if it's wrong, but you really have to stay here a long time to, some districts you get, the guide
Bid
goes
all.
up gradually all the time. Here, you have to really be loyal to the district to get, to move up, as opposed to other districts. You have to show your time.
And then, out of curiosity, what are like the major
Summary.
what are the major milestones in like that, you know, that sort of
The guide in front of me.
is
but-
it-
Bubbles?
well, yeah, I guess if I'm a teacher, I start, I'm 0 to 5, and at year 5 I get, you know, X percent. At year 10, like what, as a,
Yeah.
you know, stepping into the shoes of an educator, like what's ahead of me? Like what's my path, right? So I'm just curious.
Typically, the strategy has been to smooth the guide over time, that going back a number of years, at least in this district, other districts are different, the different philosophies, that you'll have, I think, unofficially, they're called bubble steps. You may be relatively flat, and boom, you see a 6 or 7 or 8K increase. We have over time tried to smooth those out. As Mrs. Bauer has said, though, where you may see, and these are not frequent by any stretch, that something that jumps out at you like this after 20 years, where you see that bump. That, believe it or not, that one big jump there is quite a large increase, and I'll say hit to the payroll line, but it's at the expense or lack of expense of that smoothing. So the philosophy there over time has been to keep it capped at 80K for the first up to 19 years before you see that jump, as opposed to running through the 80s, 90s, low 100s.
Yeah. Oh no, I don't question the numbers. I just kind of
No, but just the
curious about
philosophy.
the philosophy.
Yeah, but overall, the bubbles have been, by and large, smooth in most of the contracts. Is that correct, or do we still have many bubbles? I know we've worked on trying to smooth.
Well, there really aren't effectively bubbles in the supervisors or administrators' contracts or the Teamsters contract. This is really specific to the SPFEA contract, and it is addressed through negotiations.
But it's been, in this district, the bubbles have been long-standing, so it takes time to do the smoothing out. I think just in generalities, because we don't have it in front of us, but in general, teachers' beginning salaries for teachers in New Jersey are around $50,000 or a little over. And in some districts, they may move up, but let's say maybe in Scotch Plains, you could be here 15 years and maybe have moved to 70,000, I'm not sure. Whereas you might start somewhere else at 70,000 as coming out of school, depending upon the job. So it's definitely been a loyalty thing here, the way the bubbles were built in.
No, I appreciate the clarification.
Mr. Aiken, thank you for that question. It does get lonely here sometimes, and no, I mean, quite honestly, questions like that
The
are
public, people
welcomed
listening will ask.
because we
will
don't always
wonder.
have opportunities to either give a philosophy or why things were done, and something comes up in conversation, it's, hey, that dumb board, why did they do that, without being able to have a discussion like this as to, for better or for worse, at least you knew the strategy. So certainly appreciate that you're following along and asking questions. Anyone else? Mr. Lewis, Mr. Jukes, you can't top that? Sorry, I don't know your name. You haven't been up to the microphone, so.
Come on up.
No, okay, seeing no one else wishing to address the board, going once, twice, okay, we'll close this portion. Anyone for the good of the order? Dr. Kulikowski, I saw your hand go first.
I was invited by Mr. Neller, the assistant principal at Park Middle School, to be one of the guest speakers at the Career Day on Friday, January 31st at Park Middle School. So from 12:15 through dismissal, I met with 4 different groups of 8th graders to talk about careers in dentistry.
Nice.
Thank you.
American Dental Health Month, very good.
Well, yeah, it's not, it's National Children's Dental Health Month, yes, it is. It's a quinkadinkle, but that was in January when I was there, and I was paired with an industrial hygienist, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, because it's 2 totally different careers. You think dentist and hygienist, but it was more for the environment, and actually,
She was a former coworker of mine.
Winkler was there as well, visiting.
Ah,
That was really interesting. I went as a visitor to see, just to observe it and see how it did. I was impressed with the students and many of their questions actually were pretty astute and pretty on the ball. It was interesting to hear the insightful things they came up with. I sat in on a few of the sessions. I sat in with Karen and the environmental person who happened to. I sat there looking at her, thinking she looked familiar, and thinking, I'm sure I've just seen her around town. And then when it ended, and I said, I used to do this, and she's like, yeah, I'd know you anywhere. She was a former coworker of mine. That's how I knew her. So that was neat. I got to see a few of the different sessions. One with a radiologist and someone from an organization that brings medical supplies to parts of the world where they need them, like a nonprofit organization that does that. So that was neat. But
Very good, thank you. Anyone on this side?
I have something for the good of the order. A request. If we could just be provided with the committee calendars. I know we've talked about it in the past, but just so that all board members are aware of all committee meetings when they're happening, just so we can keep abreast of it.
Very good. I know Mrs. Saradaki was working with the committee chairs to try to true up the calendars as they
I thought they were
Become-
final now.
I think they're.
Yeah.
Well, with finance and facilities, I worked.
But I don't know
Okay,
if we
quit
put
your
that on
bragging over there,
resolution.
Mrs. Warner. The 2 committees you are on are final, but there's still others working on getting the dates
Well,
down.
curriculum has had
Yeah, our
a
dates are-
calendar, and strategic planning, because we just had our first meeting, we will have it by, I'm sure, the
Okay.
next meeting.
So,
Could we
so
put
the
it on
request
our
would be,
web?
once they're locked down, let's get them published for the benefit of the board and
For
then
everybody.
Thank you.
the public too.
Question,
Yeah.
please. Couldn't we put it on the board's webpage?
See, we're not.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you.
I had the pleasure last week of attending, it was cabaret night at the high school. It was done through our choral groups led by Jan Allen. And what was nice about this was, besides the different choral groups coming up and doing a few different numbers, that interspersed with that, there were a lot of solos and duets that the pieces had to be approved by Mrs. Allen, but you saw a lot of students young adults highlighted. Most of them had a Broadway slant to the songs that were done, were taken from a show. But it ran the gamut from Spider-Man to Thoroughly Modern Millie, the different numbers that were selected. So it was a couple hours of good entertainment, once again, that our choral groups, group-wise as well as individually, do bring us pride. And it was an entertaining couple hours. So, anyone else for the good of the order? Mrs. Winkler?
I had the pleasure last week of attending Cole's third annual science fair, which was pretty.
There, what?
Third annual
Third?
science fair.
Wait, a minute.
Coles
They've been
School.
holding science fairs since time immemorial.
This
I
is
think there was a
different
break
time.
in that.
Yeah.
There was a
Slightly
break in
different
that where there weren't science
format.
fairs for quite a while.
Got tired of volcanoes?
No, you have to remember.
All the kids want to make the
volcanoes
volcanoes.
are The next group of kids.
Warner, you're breaking out of your cabin fever tonight too, boy. You are just an animal tonight. Look at you over there.
Sorry.
The trains were difficult coming from Manhattan, I'm guessing. Thank you, Ms. Winkler. Anyone else for the good of the order? Okay, our next meeting will be next week, and then we'll have two in March on the 20th and the 27th. If there's nothing else, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
See you next week, folks.